Welcome everyone, my name is Rigel and today I want to reflect a little bit on my time in Europe. Now, originally I was going to record this in July or even August, right after I had left Vilnius, so this video would be about my time in Vilnius specifically. But depression and other things got a hold of me, and now I'm back home in East Asia, and so this video is going to be about all of my time in Europe, not just Vilnius, but this video will still mostly be about my time in Vilnius because that's kind of where I spent a lot of my time, like actually living as opposed to like traveling around and such. But yeah, this video is going to be about that. I'm going to reflect on my time there. There's also going to be some stories of what I did and what I experienced and some lessons that I've learned. So with that said, let's get into it. But before we get into Vilnius, let's kind of talk about my origin story. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while now, you know that I come from East Asia, and what you might not know is that before I went to Vilnius, I took a Russian course for 2 years at university because I had already learned a little bit of Russian, like kind of just by myself, back in secondary school or high school. So I decided I wanted to go somewhere for a little exchange, and my mom kind of insisted that I go somewhere where to speak Russian so as to kind of practice my Russian, which I guess is fair enough, but yeah, her first choice was Russia, of course, because she is pro-Russia, but first off, for the most part, I didn't really want to go to Russia, with the exception of St. Petersburg, which arguably is the most kind of European Russian city, both geographically and historically. But that wasn't really an option because of the Russian universities that were available for the exchange program in my university. I believe there were 3 universities in Moscow and also one all the way in the Far East. I want to say Yekaterinburg, but I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, it wasn't really places that I wanted to go, so I didn't go to Russia in the end. The second place I wanted to try, which was also a Russian-speaking place, is Kazakhstan. Now, I'm really fascinated with the relationship of Kazakhstan with kind of the Russian-speaking world, because for the longest time Kazakhstan was strongly pro-Russia, because even to this day Kazakhstan, or at least part of it, still shares area codes or dialing prefixes with Russia, that is +7. This was actually an area code that was set way back in the Soviet Union days, and since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, most countries formerly in the Soviet Union have switched to their own suffixes. For example, I can't actually think of that many right now, but I know that obviously Lithuania is +370, and I think Latvia is +371. So yeah, multiple countries, actually almost all of them, have switched to their own area codes except Kazakhstan, which is still using +7, which today is mainly only used in Russia, but sometimes it is still used in Kazakhstan, although they are switching to +997, which is kind of similar to their neighbors, because I believe, off the top of my head, I think Turkmenistan is +993, and other countries in Central Asia are also using +99 something, so it made sense for Kazakhstan to change to +997, but still, there are still phone numbers in Kazakhstan today that are using +7, which is crazy. In addition, this might sound crazy, but you might also know this from just general knowledge, but Kazakhstan actually left the Soviet Union later than Russia itself. So you might have seen that video where it claims that Kazakhstan was the entire Soviet Union for I think it was a couple weeks or a couple days or something like that. But yeah, it goes to show that in the kind of early stages, Kazakhstan was really, really pro-Russia, and obviously to this day, there's still a lot of people in Kazakhstan who speak Russian, as well as obviously a large contingent of ethnic Russians who live in Kazakhstan. So that was somewhere else that I could have gone as well. I think I could have gone to like Almaty or Astana or something like that. However, the entire country of Kazakhstan was just not on my list of, on my university's list of exchange universities, so that was out the question. And then finally, I landed on Lithuania, or more specifically, Vilnius University. Now, at first, I thought there was only one university in all of Lithuania, but no, there's multiple, obviously. But Vilnius University is kind of the largest and the most prestigious of all of them. But even in Vilnius, as I would later find out, there's actually a university that literally is right next to the informatics campus of Vilnius University. Is called Mykolo Romerio Universitetas, or I think that would translate roughly to Mykolas Romeris University or something like that. But that university also has exchange students. I saw some Indian students there. But that wasn't on my list. But Vilnius University was, and obviously in prior years, I've more and more been exposed to Lithuanian content through Eurovision, especially. So in the end, that's what I went for, and part of it actually benefited from my mom not knowing that Lithuania had their own language. I know that sounds crazy, but yeah, people from these parts really aren't all that geographically knowledgeable, let's just say. But in the end, I managed to get the offer from Vilnius University, as did two other people from my university. As far as I can tell, in my year for Vilnius University, there were 6 people total from my city. 2 other of which were from my university. That's how I ended up in Vilnius. I only took 2 courses because I wanted to have more time to kind of look around, to explore both Vilnius and kind of Europe more generally. One of those courses was a Lithuanian language course, just a basic one. I aced pretty much everything. I think I got full marks in the final test. And the other course was something kind of vaguely related to computer science, because that's my degree here in East Asia. So, I took 2 courses, and for that course, I lived in Vilnius from late January to late June. Well, more precisely, the actual semester itself started in early February, and ended kind of in early to mid-June, because that's kind of when the exams were happening. So that's basically how I ended up in Lithuania at Vilnius University. Now, living in Lithuania, or really doing any sort of exchange, was kind of new for me, because up until this point I had been living just with my parents. I still do, actually, but this was my first time living kind of by myself for an extended period of time. So here are some tips I have for living in dormitories or otherwise co-living environments. I know that some of my classmates in the Lithuanian language course were actually just living in kind of co-living environments, apartments, I suppose, instead of living in a dormitory, which is fair enough, because the conditions really aren't great, but it's cheaper, so that's what I took. And so, like I said, here are some of my tips. The first one is slop food, minimize dishes. Now, what that means is basically just one-pot meals, I guess. I think, personally, my recommendation would be basically pasta dishes. I think those are especially conducive to being one-pot meals, and those can be combined with all sorts of things. You can combine them with sauces, with soups, and then you can throw in veggies and stuff, and you don't need to wash any more dishes other than the pot itself, and it really saves you time if you need to save time. I usually don't, I'm just lazy. But that kind of slop food really, again, it minimizes dishes and it's easier to eat from, especially if you're like myself, living in a place where there's no table and I kind of have to eat on the bed, and it's just a lot less messy that way. But if you have a table, absolutely you can take the time to, cook more elaborate dishes. You can, cook different things served differently. But if you're like myself, you don't have a lot of space in your room, and or you are lazy, you can just cook one meal in a one pot, with like pasta or sometimes rice, depending on what you're like, and it just minimizes dishes. So that's one thing. Another thing is trying to store as many things in your room as possible. This is mainly to kind of minimize robbery, basically, or stealing. Unfortunately, it didn't really happen to me in terms like robbery. Actually, the worst thing that probably got stolen from me was a pair of white socks, which was very perplexing because I had like 3 other pairs of socks and they didn't get stolen. It was just this specific pair of white socks that got stolen. I don't really get it, but that was the worst thing that I lost because the rack for hanging laundry was outside of my room. So yeah, that was kind of an inevitable risk I was going to have to take. And another classmate in my Lithuanian language class actually said that an entire pan of his got stolen. But yeah, at least in my specific dormitory, I didn't suffer from too much robbery, so that was a good thing. But in general, I still recommend storing most of this stuff in your room as possible. If possible as well, food and stuff that you want to put in the fridge. If your room has a small fridge, even better. One thing that I found out quite interestingly was that it was only my dormitory that had small fridges, and because like I mentioned earlier, I have 2 other people from my year who also went to Vilnius University. They ended up in different dormitories, and I casually mentioned that I kept my frozen food in my fridge, and they were like, wait, you have a fridge of your own? So yeah, it really depends on what you get in your room, but in general, I would just recommend, if you have like frozen foods and stuff, or just stuff that you couldn't eat and you want to like keep for later to reheat and have for another meal, try to store it in your room. So that's one thing. And speaking of frozen foods, don't sleep on them. I think the big one especially is peas. I think a lot of people are starting to appreciate frozen peas for what they are, because oftentimes they are probably better than fresh peas you can get, if you can even get them, which in Lithuania the answer is usually you can't. So yeah, frozen peas really come in handy. But I would also expand that to frozen vegetables in general, especially kind of frozen vegetable mixes, peas, carrots, corn, that kind of stuff. It makes it really easy to just add a little bit of fiber to your meal, or if you want to add some color and interesting visuals to, say, your fried rice, because I made fried rice a couple of times at the dormitory. It's a really easy way to make your food look a lot more appealing and also give yourself a little bit of dietary fiber. So yeah, I would highly recommend strongly that you use frozen vegetables and peas, especially if you're someone who can't trust themselves to finish a bag of fresh vegetables before they expire. That's me right there. And the third one I want to talk about is frozen pizza. There's a stigma around frozen pizza, but in terms of taste, at least as from my non-Italian perspective, I find frozen pizza to be surprisingly good. It might not be good nutritionally, but I think taste-wise it actually works quite well. But Obviously, that's just me. I think Italians would very much disagree, but personally, I find frozen pizza, if you're really not in the mood to cook anything, you can just go to the supermarket, get a frozen pizza, and bake it in the oven, and Bob's your uncle, as they say. So I would say, in general, just don't sleep on frozen foods. The frozen technology nowadays is really, really good, and I think you'd be surprised at how good sometimes frozen foods can turn out. For example, one time I bought a kind of frozen paella set, and it actually turned out quite well. It's not really authentic, to be fair, but it's pretty good. And honestly, I think the stigma with frozen foods should really go away. So on the subject of foods, if your roommate has a lot of something, I think with their permission, of course, you should probably borrow from them as opposed to getting your own. In my case, this mostly means salt. Now, in Lithuania, I don't know about other places. Salt is usually sold in kind of these big bags, and obviously, unless you're someone who uses a lot of salt, I don't think you can really reasonably use an entire bag in a few months. So what I do usually is just I get my own little container and I pour a little bit from the bag that my roommate has, and so on one hand, it helps him to consume the thing quicker, and on the other hand, I get some free salt that I don't have to throw away as leftovers when I leave the dormitory. So that's one other thing that I want to talk about. And another thing about dormitories in particular is that obviously it depends on your dormitory, but in my case, we have kind of communal washing machines, and if you want to use it pretty frequently, I think it's a good idea to kind of try to figure out the peak usage times and then try to avoid them for your own usage, basically. Same goes with things like showers and stuff, and obviously the kitchen. So that's why I had a weird time of eating dinner and stuff, because at the usual dinner time there'd be a lot of like Spanish and Italian people in the kitchen, like up to 9 or 10 in there, and I was just like, nope, I don't want to be part of that. And so I usually eat dinner a bit later than that, or a lot later than that. But if there's communal kind of facilities in your dormitory, which there usually are, but if there are those facilities, then I think it's a good idea to kind of figure out the peak usage times and then avoid them. So, for example, for the communal washing machines, I found that it's very common for it to be used around maybe 6 p.m. onwards, because people have, come back from class. So what I do is when other people are at class, I do my washing when I'm not at class, so I can get my washing up done while they're away doing some other stuff. So those are some tips for going to do any co-living spaces and or dormitories. So if you're going to do like a dormitory, even in your home country, I think that is something useful to keep in mind. So with that said, let's get on to one of the most interesting things that I've observed throughout my travels in Europe versus the culture here in East Asia, and that, of course, means cultural differences. Now, the first one I want to talk about, this could be an entire video in and of itself, but basically the dietary culture in Europe and in Asia, or even just specifically East Asia, is very, very different. So first off, the very concept of a restaurant is very different as well. Over here in Asia, more generally, a restaurant is just a place where you go to for food, basically, and nothing more. In Europe, a restaurant is somewhere where you meet up with friends and or family. You sit down, you have a chat over food as opposed to just eating. And then you maybe spend an hour or two at that establishment, as opposed to just eating, paying, and then leaving, which is what you more normally do here in East Asia. This kind of instant establishment does exist in Europe, but in general they're called like kind of cafeterias or canteens or something like that. And again, they do exist in Europe, even in Vilnius itself, where there's actually a chain called iLunch, where you order on iPads and pay through contactless, and you don't have to talk to anyone. You can just pick up your food through a tray, and then you eat, and then you put your tray back, and Bob's your uncle. But that kind of establishment is still really, really rare in Europe, or specifically Western Europe, and actually Eastern Europe as well, to be honest. But it's still really rare there as a kind of eating establishment, whereas here in Asia, this is pretty much the standard mode of kind of so-called restaurants. It really depends on where you go, but in general, the idea of a restaurant here in Asia is you go in, you order what you want, you eat, and you leave. It's a very quick thing. Again, as opposed to in Western Europe or just Europe more generally, where you go in with someone else, again, usually friends or family. You sit down, you eat and talk for hours on end, and then at the end, you pay a massive bill and then go. So it's a very, very different culture across these two continents, and again, I could do an entire video just on this alone, but that is all I'll say about it. I will say one of my most vivid memories in Vilnius is Valentine's Day, when I went to a mall to eat at a relatively expensive restaurant on my own, and oh boy, the looks I was getting from people who were queuing outside to have their meal. I was just there on my own because at that point I didn't really have any friends. And in fairness, I still don't really have friends, but at least I have my Lithuanian chorus classmates, which I could and did go out to eat with. But I didn't really have friends at that point, so I just went to eat on my own, and I didn't really feel like cooking that night. So, yeah, I just vividly remember the looks I was getting from people, especially couples that night who were going out to eat and splurge on a more expensive place as opposed to cooking at home or whatnot. And speaking of that, it's also a lot cheaper to cook on your own. The produce is just very, very cheap. I mean, for one thing, if you go to Rimi, which is a supermarket chain that you can find in Latvia, Lithuania, and I think Estonia. I'm not so sure about the last one. But at Rimi, which is a supermarket chain, you can get 2 liters of apple juice for less than €2, which is mind-blowing to me. I don't know how you could get the prices that low, but that's just a fact of life in especially Eastern Europe, where produce is just really, really cheap, and it's massively encouraged for you to cook. Even if you're not that good at cooking, you should just cook for yourself, maybe even just simple meals, because it is just a lot cheaper. So again, this can be a whole video, but that's all I'll say about that. And the other thing I want to say about eating, in terms of my experienced cultural differences, is meal times. See, in Asia, or at least in my part of East Asia, you can go and eat whenever, pretty much, with the exception of closing, and even then, a lot of places don't close that early. They close maybe 10 or 11, which actually it depends on the place, but sometimes it's the same as in Lithuania, but in general, it's closer to 10 than it is to 11. But in Europe in general, there is a very specific meal time that most people adhere to. it really depends on the place, obviously. But one time when I was in Vienna for the Taya and Luke Black gig, I wanted to go and eat ramen at a place, which I did go actually in the end. But I wanted to go there around, I want to say 2 p.m. or something like that, or 3 p.m. or something like that. But they were closed. It's not a place that usually opens early, or rather opens late either. They actually open around 12, but they're one of those really selective places that closes after kind of peak lunchtime and only reopens at 5 p.m. So in the end, I ended up going there and having my first meal of the day at 5 p.m. So clearly in Europe, there's this very established idea of you should eat whatever meal at this specific time, as opposed to you can just go and eat whenever you want, wherever you want, which is more of a thing here in East Asia. So yeah, that's all I have to say about kind of eating or dining culture in Europe. But again, this could be an entire video unto itself, and I'm sure tons of research papers have been written about this specific topic. But if you want a specific video about this from me, let me know in the comments. But for now, let's move on to the next point, which is the bus. Now, Vilnius is quite famously one of the only capital cities in Europe to have neither a tram nor a metro. A lot of cities have either a tram or a metro, or sometimes both, but in Vilnius, you have neither. The closest thing you have to a tram is trolleybus, which is a very interesting little relic. The old buses were actually apparently purchased from Czechoslovakia, although there are newer trolley buses, and they are still being used all throughout Lithuania, and actually mostly just the major cities, but especially Vilnius, obviously. But in Vilnius, there is no tram or metro, so naturally the main form of public transport is the bus. So the form in which you take the bus is actually really, really different. I would say the model that we have here in my city specifically, and also in other places that were formerly colonized by the British, our model of taking the bus comes from the British, where you get on and then you pay for every single trip, basically. And or you can of course you can get like monthly tickets, weekly tickets, stuff like that. As far as I can tell, that's not really a thing here in my city, at least. But that's kind of the model here. You pay for every trip that you take. But in Lithuania, and I think in a lot of other related places as well, what you do is well, it depends on the city even, but specifically for Vilnius, what you do is you get your ticket and don't talk to the driver at all. I think for airport buses you can talk to the driver, but in kind of city buses, there's even a sign that specifically says do not talk to the driver, and I'm sure that was probably set up during COVID. But in any case, what you normally do if you're a resident, you can get kind of a monthly ticket, or well, I'm not the best person to explain this because right now my brain is mush, but there are excellent videos out there kind of talking about how public transport works in Vilnius. But basically what I did was I got a bunch of 3-month tickets, or 2-month tickets, I'm not sure, but those, obviously, because you're buying kind of in bulk, it's a lot cheaper than if you were just to buy like a 1-day ticket or even just a single trip ticket. Actually, I don't think that's a thing. I think there's 30-minute tickets though. That's definitely a thing that I got. But for most of my time in Vilnius, I bought like 2-month or 3-month tickets, and then I got them actually at a discount because in Vilnius there's this thing where if you are a student, you get if you're a student or elderly, I believe, you get an 80% discount, which is crazy, which means taking the bus is dirt cheap. which is good for your finances, but not so good because the bus isn't that great, which I'll get onto later on. But in Vilnius, if you take the bus, you're just expected to have an activated ticket, which they do actually check once in a while. Again, I'll get onto this later when I get onto specifically Lithuania, but on Europe more generally, or at least on the continent of Europe, you're not really expected to buy a ticket for every single trip. But that's different in the UK, where you at least have to validate your ticket for every trip, and I think that model was what was adopted by other places that were colonized by the UK. So yeah, it's a very different model where in Europe you don't necessarily have to interact with the bus driver. You just need to have a valid bus ticket. In some cases, they're not even going to check your ticket. If you have it, great. If you don't have it, you just gotta pray that no one checks your ticket. And sometimes it works, actually. I think when I stayed in Vienna in the second time in late July, I think for the most part I did not have a valid ticket at all. I think I'm kind of admitting to crime here, but in general, it's a very much like trust-based system. Although, like I said, in Lithuania, they do still check tickets periodically. Like I said, I'm not the best person to explain this, but yeah, the culture in Europe or in continental Europe, as opposed to here in East Asia, is very, very different. The third thing that I found to be very, very different is aircon. Now, as I speak, I have my air conditioning running right now because it is boiling out there. But in Europe, even when it gets very hot, they don't really have aircon except for kind of hotel rooms, or if you install one in your own house or apartment or something like that. But in general, it's not really a thing, especially in the UK, where they like to whine about things being so hot, but they don't necessarily take steps to kind of alleviate that in their own establishment. Obviously, they have it in like big places, like malls and such. But other than that, if you're at an older place, like even in my at my campus in Vilnius University, there is no aircon at all. There is no aircon at all, and in many cases, you're just expected to basically cool yourself down using a fan or just suck it up, to be honest. So, yeah, that's something that's very different. And to be fair, obviously, Europe is cooler than Asia in general, but still, there are still some days where it is absolutely just boiling out there, and I don't know how people survive in these circumstances without air conditioning. But yeah, it really depends on the places you go to. I think, ironically, the place that was hottest for me while I was traveling through Europe was Vienna. So, that's not a place you normally associate with being hot, but when I was there, it was absolutely smoldering. So, yeah, I just want to say that I think a lot of Europe would really benefit from air conditioning, especially places that actually really get hot, like I said, Vienna, and also London. I think London also gets pretty hot, at least relative to where I was in Glasgow. So yeah, it really depends on where you go, but I think air conditioning would be a welcome addition to many places, especially with global warming. It's getting hotter and hotter in different places. So yeah, it really depends on the case. I think in certain places like Glasgow, it's fine because you can just open the window and it will be damp, but it will also be relatively cool because it's been raining all day. It just depends. But another thing that I found interesting are flights. Now, I'm sure this is because of the advent of budget airlines, but in general, I found that flights in Europe, unless you specifically pay for it, you're not going to get a meal unless you're in like business class. Which, let's be honest, how many of us can actually afford it, right? But in general, you don't really get a meal. At most, you might get a snack. You might get a little bread roll. I think I got a bread roll for my flight to and from Poland. When I was going to Copenhagen from Vilnius for Eurovision, I got like bread rolls from Lot Airways, but and I also got the very infamous blueberry juice when I was traveling on Finnair to go. I was about to say to Helsinki, but I went to Helsinki on Air Baltic. So yeah, not that, but I did take Finnair once, and they did have the infamous blueberry juice. So yeah, they don't really have food, whereas here in Asia, even if the flight is super short, like slightly longer than an hour, they will still have a full meal for you, which is hilarious because a lot of people just end up not being able to finish their food anyways, and it's still served to you anyway, regardless of how short the flight may be. Again, it might just be like 2 hours, an hour, or something like that, but even though these are like kind of budget airlines, they still serve food, which is really interesting to me. And I'd grown up actually knowing that every flight would come with a meal, which obviously isn't exactly the same in Europe, which I mean, it depends on your perspective, I suppose, whether that's a good thing or not. But you can obviously request for meals, especially if you're going on a longer flight. For example, going from Riga to Barcelona, which, by the way, yes, it is a thing, even though I missed mine because of a delayed flight. But yeah, that's just one kind of interesting little tidbit that I wanted to point out, that at least budget airlines in Europe tend not to have food for flights that are like an hour or slightly longer than that, even though an equivalent flight, as in equivalent for flight time in kind of Asia, Southeast Asia, would also have food for those types of flights. So yeah, just an interesting little tidbit. And speaking of eating, yes, I talk about eating a lot because in general I don't have much else to talk about, but yeah, another thing I want to talk about obviously is water. In Asia, it depends on the place, obviously. I think in Japan you can probably have drink tap water safely, but here in my specific city, at least, I've never grown up being able to just drink from the tap. That's not really a thing here, but it is very much a thing in most parts of Europe. Note, however, that drinkable or potable tap water, try saying that 5 times fast. Potable tap water without saying potable top water. But anyways, drinkable tap water does not equal tasty tap water. In fact, I would say the worst ever tap water I had ever tasted was in Copenhagen, surprisingly. You'd expect a city as advanced as Copenhagen to have good tap water, but they really don't. And I told my mom about this, and she said that in Copenhagen and also in kind of neighboring parts of northern Germany, you also have like really bad tasting tap water, and I don't know if that's true, but it makes sense. But yeah, in general, I would recommend not having tap water in Copenhagen. It just doesn't taste that good. Actually, quite a bit worse, I would say, even than the tap water in Vilnius, even though that can also fluctuate at times. But in general, tap water in, I would say, Scotland is amazing. The tap water in Baltic countries is pretty good. And also tap water in Sweden is also really good as well as in Finland. So I don't know necessarily about places more southern, because I'll be honest, I didn't really travel much of southern Europe, but in general, it's not really advisable here in most parts of Asia to drink tap water. It's usually recommended to, boil the water first and then cool it down if you want like cold water and stuff like that. So it was quite the culture shock for me to be able to just drink water straight from the tap and be assured that it is clean in terms of bacteria and stuff. Although, like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it tastes good. So, yeah, that's tap water. Again, like I said, don't drink tap water in Copenhagen. It's safe to drink, but not tasty to drink. So, with that said, let's move on to The Sun. Not the right-wing newspaper in the UK, but in general, just the experience with The Sun in Europe as opposed to here in Asia. It's very interesting because here it's very common to have strong sun, obviously, and but the UV isn't that strong in comparison. The UV rating, ultraviolet, that kind of stuff. But in Europe, when it's sunny, it might not be that bright, but the UVs are really strong, and it could genuinely harm your skin if you're out for too long. So, when it's boiling in Vienna, for example, you really do not want to be out there for that long. It is genuinely going to be a lot more, I don't want to say painful, but it's going to be a lot more affecting, a lot more it's going to affect your skin a lot more than the equivalent amount of time spent in the sun here in Asia, let's just say. So that's one thing. And also in just my general experience, it just tends to be a lot more rainy and or snowy in Europe. So even the time you get to see the sun is very rare. And I think I finally remembered what I was trying to say a few months ago when I wrote this slide. But basically, what I'm trying to kind of highlight with this is the times for sunrise and sunset, which is crazy. Like, when I was in Vilnius, I think there were days where the sun was only down for, I want to say, 6 hours of the day. Like, it would go down, I want to say, I don't know, 11 p.m., something like that, and then it would start rising again around 4 a.m. So it was really only down for a very short amount of time, and you don't really get that much time for sleep, for actually sleeping in the dark, whereas here in Asia it's a lot more regular, at least according to our system. The sun sets starting around 6 p.m. or so, and then starts rising again around maybe 5 or 6 or something like that in the morning. And in our minds, it just makes a lot more sense, whereas in Europe, specifically in northern/eastern Europe, depending on the season, it can really set really early, like 4 p.m. or something like that, or it can set really late, like 11 p.m., like I just mentioned. And as a result of this, it really affects my kind of perception of things, the perception of time in Vilnius, for example. Like, it really doesn't seem that late, but if you look at the clock, it's already, like, again, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and it's only barely starting to set. Meanwhile, all the restaurants have already closed because it's 10 or 11 p.m. They, work by the clock, not by the sun. And so it's just a really freaky thing. So, you think it's not that late, but actually you're looking at the clock and it's almost bedtime. So it's just something that I've really not been used to. And in a way, I'm glad that I've come back to a place where at least my perception of sunrises and sunsets are a bit more normal, as opposed to the sun only setting around 8 p.m. or even 11 p.m. It's just really freaky to me. And I'll be honest, it's something that I still haven't gotten used to, even after living for more than 6 months in Europe. So that's just something, if you're someone from these parts of the world, if you're planning to do some sort of exchange or study in Europe, I think that's just something that you have to keep in mind. So with that said, let's get on to something a little bit more lighthearted, which is drinks that you can get in the supermarket. Now, there's a lot of those, obviously, to talk about, but obviously, for my case, the main ones I want to talk about are alcoholic drinks. In Lithuania, there is a very interesting law where for 6 days of the week, the alcohol sales end at 8 p.m. So you can't go into a supermarket at 10 or anything and try to get a can of beer, because you'll be turned away, because that's illegal. And on Sunday, the alcohol sales end at 3 p.m. So I'm really not sure why they do that. It might be like kind of a consequence of their Catholic history, maybe. But today in Lithuania, you can't buy alcohol past 8 p.m. On most days of the week, and on Sunday you can't buy it past 3 p.m. So that's kind of crazy, and many times I have been just rushing from my dormitory to the nearest supermarket just to get myself like a can of beer or a can of cider or something like that. But interestingly, there's another thing I want to talk about, and that is wine or other kinds of strong alcohol in cartons, in paper cartons. I'm not really sure that's really a thing here in Asia, but one thing that I did while I was in Vilnius, and I kind of greatly enjoyed it, was I got a big carton of I think it was sangria at my local supermarket, which again, I don't think that's really a thing here in Asia. I don't think you can get alcohol in cartons. You can get them. You can get milk in cartons, but you can't really get alcohol that way. And you also can't get alcohol, I think, in big plastic bottles, because usually, obviously, you can get wine in glass bottles, but I think alcohol in plastic bottles is still kind of a weird concept here in Asia. But I also got a big bottle of some sort of, I think, pre-mixed pina colada type drink in a kind of 1 liter plastic bottle, and that was really fun, but although not really great for your health. But yeah, that's something you can do in Europe, so just keep that in mind, I suppose. And also, like I mentioned earlier, you can get apple juice for really, really cheap, especially in the case of Vilnius, you can go to Rimi and they'll have their own brand of either multivitamin, I believe, or apple juice. You can get 2 liters of for less than €1, which is crazy. So yeah, even in terms of just drinks, there's a massive difference here, but at the very least, here in Asia, we can buy it past 8 p.m., so who wins in the end, right? So, yeah. After that, I also want to talk about traveling, but it's just very brief. But basically, here, at least in my part of Asia, it's very hard to really travel to any place. It's not just like you can pack up a backpack and just say, okay, we're just going here for a night or two. You have to pack up a whole suitcase or something like that, because from here, most places you will have to fly, whether it's to Japan, to South Korea, to Vietnam, or anything like that. Because countries are just bigger, and in general, you just have to kind of just fly to different countries to experience their culture and whatnot. But in Europe, specifically the EU, you can just fly around, or even just drive, or even just take a cruise, which is one thing that I did one time when I went from I think it was Tallinn to Stockholm. There's actually a cruise line that serves that specific routes. I think it's called Tallink. They also serve other routes. You can also go to like Helsinki, for example. There's also, I think you even go to Mariehamn, which is the capital of the Åland island. I once during my travels in July, I went from Tallinn to Stockholm via a cruise ship, which was crazy, and I had a lot of fun, even though it was literally less than 24 hours. But yeah, it was a very unique experience. Obviously, you can also just go in a much easier path. You can go there. You can just again take a train. You can take the plane or a very short flight. Or you can take Flixbus, which is something I'll also get onto later. But you can just travel between countries really easily with very little luggage, just willy-nilly. You don't need to check your passports or anything like that. Whereas in Asia, every time you travel anywhere, you'll have to get out your passport, you'll have to pack a bunch of luggage, you'll have to fly. And it's just a lot less convenient, in my opinion. And this is also part of why I'm very much a pro-EU person. The free movement is just incomparable. The free movement is so free that I didn't realize that I was overstaying my visa until about a month later. And that's something I might get onto later. But basically, when I finished my visa in Lithuania, my assumption was that I just needed to leave Lithuania, which I did. I went to Latvia. But turns out the idea with the visa was that I needed to leave the entire EU, not just Lithuania. So when I traveled throughout the EU for an entire month, and I got to, I think it was Berlin or Frankfurt when I had to fly to Glasgow. They told me that I had been overstaying my visa and I had to pay a bail to get out of that and to kind of quote-unquote re-enter the EU through my tourist visa, and I had to pay 110 euros for that, which kind of sucked. But yeah, that's something I'll get onto later. But in any case, traveling within the EU is just a lot easier, a lot more casual of a thing that you can just do. You can just willy-nilly pack a backpack and just go to another country for a couple of days. And, you know, as opposed to here in Asia where you're doing the whole thing of, getting out your passport, packing a whole suitcase, taking a long flight and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's just really different. Another thing that's really different in Europe as opposed to Asia is the whole thing surrounding LGBTQ+. Now, I think in bigger cities here in East Asia, you have pride parades now. I think you might have them in like Tokyo and Seoul and stuff like that. But don't quote me on that. I don't even know if that's true. But in general, it's not really a thing here, even in the more progressive cities. It's something more rather, don't show off and we'll just ignore you, as opposed to you're free to express your identity however you like, which is quite different, obviously. And, obviously I'm not saying that there aren't homophobic incidents in Europe. There obviously are. But in general, in my mind at least, it seems that people in Europe are not just tolerant of LGBTQ people, but even more so, they are accepting. They're not just tolerant; they're accepting of these people, regardless of basically who they love, basically. And actually, I went to my first ever Pride parade in Vilnius, and I actually got to meet up again with Sylvester Belt, and I also saw Monica Liu perform as well, which was really, really cool. But we went to this parade. It was really cool, and apparently one of my classmates from the Lithuanian language course had also gone there as well, but I didn't see her, but whatever. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience for me to go to my first my first Pride Parade in Vilnius. Who knew there even were Pride Parades in Vilnius? And even more interestingly, my first time ever seeing a drag queen speak Lithuanian. Actually, there were two drag queens who were hosting a little show after the parade. And they were speaking in Lithuanian, but they were clearly like dressed up as drag queens, and so it was just a really eye-opening and very interesting experience. Obviously, I'm on Eurovision Twitter. A lot of people I know are LGBTQ, but it's just really interesting to experience that culture in person, which I would never get a chance to do while I'm here. At least in my city, I don't think we've ever had pride parades, and hopefully one day I'll be able to go back to Europe and really start to re-experience this kind of thing, even though I myself am straight and not really belonging to the community, other than kind of as an ally. But it's just really interesting, the attitude towards gay people and again other people in the LGBTQ plus community, and I want to say that my city is a little bit more tolerant, but even then we're still kind of stuck on the stage of tolerant as opposed to accepting and embracing. So again, it's just a very interesting cultural difference, and absolutely there are gay people here in my city, but a lot of them really aren't that open at all, and really the best the best response you'd expect to have as a gay person or lesbian, whatever, here in East Asia, more generally, is just for people to ignore you. That is kind of the best you can hope to expect, as opposed to really properly being embraced and such. So, yeah, that's just a really interesting cultural difference. I was obviously going to have to bring this up at some point, being Asian and being in Western countries and stuff, and so it's just very interesting. And I also saw drag queens during Malmohagen, the pre-party that took place like a week before Eurovision, and there were a lot of drag queens there as well, and it was all very interesting. And one of them, because it was hosted in Copenhagen, one of them also spoke in Danish for a little bit, and that was also really interesting. So, finally, at least for this part at least, what I want to talk about is the divide between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And obviously Central Europe, although I would say Central Europe is kind of more of a transitional region, as opposed to really being strongly culturally defined. Like, I will happily admit that Poland and Hungary are Central European as opposed to Eastern European, but I would say, as opposed to it being its own thing, I would say it's kind of a transition between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. So, yeah, there is a lot to talk about, and obviously this is another thing where you can have an entire video discussion about, and obviously a lot of papers have been written about this cultural divide. But for me personally, the biggest thing that was different, I would say, is prices. Obviously, things are a lot cheaper in Eastern Europe, including, ironically, imported goods. So, for example, the candy called toffee, spelled Toffifee, I think it's called. I once bought that in Vienna, and I thought that it would be cheaper in Vienna because it was closer to the place of origin, which is the Netherlands. But I had it, and then I went back to Vilnius because they actually also sell that candy in Maxima as well, which is one of the major supermarkets. I went there, and it was still cheaper, even though it was imported all the way from the Netherlands, which I found to be really, really interesting. And obviously all sorts of other produce are cheaper as well, again, even including imported stuff. So I think it's really interesting, the prices of things between Eastern and Western Europe, and how this could be attractive to someone from Western Europe who might not be able to afford prices of common goods in Western Europe. So, for example, I would say particularly the UK is particularly expensive right now, as are the Nordic countries, and also I want to say Germany, but I would say Germany isn't as bad as I expected it to be. But yeah, in general, I would say definitely Western Europe is quite a bit more expensive than Eastern Europe. My points of reference being mostly Vilnius and Riga. Those are the places that I've hung out a lot at, although prices do go up inevitably once you go to the airport. I would say the particular airport that I found to be the most expensive was Riga Airport. But other than that, I think prices in general are definitely lower in Eastern Europe. And also, quite interestingly, I was less racially discriminated in Eastern Europe. As my mom mentioned once, people in Eastern Europe are more pure, and so they're kind of more accepting of people who don't necessarily look the same as them. And even though I didn't necessarily get racially discriminated that much, actually, in general, the two times where it happened were in Western Europe as opposed to Eastern Europe. People in Eastern Europe just don't really show their racism, which I found to be quite interesting. So maybe that's something you can keep in mind, but maybe you're just a European watching this, or someone who's European passing. But yeah, those are some interesting developments and differences that I found between Eastern and Western Europe. So, speaking of Eastern Europe, let's zone in on specifically where I did my exchange program, and that's, of course, Lithuania. So, in terms of things in Lithuania, I'll be honest, I already mentioned most of it in the previous slide, but let's go through these points anyway. The first one being that the first few are about transportation. The first one being that buses don't really run between 11:30 at night and 4:30 in the morning. And in general, by that, what I mean is mostly airport buses, because that's kind of the one I have the most experience with, at least in the wee hours. But of course, other buses also kind of apply, especially for my case. I often had to take the number 53 route bus from the various malls back to my dormitory, and that also often ran it didn't run past around, I would say, 11:30, but yeah, there are midnight buses, but their coverage is severely limited, as opposed to here, where midnight buses cover all across the city. So it's very different. And so if you're, for example, arriving in Lithuania, in Vilnius, let's say past midnight, for example, you definitely need to get a Bolt or a taxi. But price-wise, I would definitely recommend a Bolt. It's also easier to book in general. It's contactless. You can just pay by Google Pay and that kind of stuff. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you're visiting Lithuania and your flight arrives past midnight, for example. So yeah, buses really don't run that much between this time. Again, I would say there are midnight buses, but again, their coverage is very limited. But yeah, another thing I really want to lament about that I didn't really write on the slide is that they often, when the buses are near their last runs of the day, they often have signs saying they are returning to a bus park, which would be fine if it weren't for the fact that it completely covers what route the bus is supposed to be. And somehow no one local finds any issue with this, but I really do, because I need to know what route I'm looking at before I get on the last bus of the day. And this has sometimes cost me dearly because I missed the last bus of the day, and so I need to find some sort of other method to get back to my dormitory or otherwise place of abode. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you're going out late in Vilnius. The buses, first off, tend not to go the full route where you might be looking for, but where they might go, they also might not even show the route, and you'd have to look at the kind of the electronic displays on the bus to see what route it actually is. And by the time you manage to do that, the bus may well have already ran off. So yeah, that's one thing I really don't like about buses in Lithuania. Is that the end of service buses at the end of the day usually don't show the routes they're going to, which is really frustrating. But yeah, in terms of public transport as well, I already mentioned there isn't any metro or tram, but there is a trolley bus. Is mostly old trolley buses, which is interesting in terms of like nostalgia factor, but also there are a few like kind of newer trolley buses, but in general, yeah, the public transport of Vilnius compared to other equivalent European capitals is really, really lacking. That is partially made up for the fact that for a lot of tickets, you can actually get discounts based on your identity. So, for example, like myself, I'm a student. I can get 80% discount, as in 80% off discounts on long-term bus tickets. That is for like 3 months or 1 month or something like that, which is crazy, and it makes riding the bus just absolutely dirt cheap, which is one thing that's good about it. And also, in general, buses are pretty punctual, I would say, as opposed to in some other places when buses might just randomly be cancelled. So that's one thing that's good about the buses, but otherwise, I think the public transport system in Vilnius is really, really lacking. But yeah, back to the discounts. There's actually also discounts for trains, believe it or not, so long as those trains are traveling within Lithuania. I found this out kind of the hard way. I had been buying tickets for full price this whole time, and then on my trip out from Lithuania to Riga, I was taking a train from Cholet. I found out that you can get a discount if you're a student. I think it's actually 50% off, which is crazy because each ticket usually costs like 19 euros or something like that. But you can get 50% off if you're a student, if you're traveling domestically within Lithuania, but that discount doesn't apply to trains going internationally. Usually, that mostly just means to Poland or to Latvia, basically. But if you're traveling domestically, it does apply. And if you're a student or you plan to study there, I think, and if you plan to like visit different parts of Lithuania, I think this could be a very good tip for you, as long as you prepare the required documents to prove your student identity, like your student card or an ISIC card or something like that. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And another thing to keep in mind is that the tap water is actually pretty good. I already talked about this in the previous slide, but basically, I find the tap water can really fluctuate in taste depending on the country you're going to and even the city you're going to. But in general, Lithuanian tap water is good, while tap water from Copenhagen really is not that good at all. And in Lithuania, you also have a bunch of supermarkets. The main four I want to talk about are Maxima, Rimi, Iki, and Norfa. I am kind of ordering these in terms of how much I prefer them. and north is at the bottom, mostly because it's just very hard to get to one these days, because there's just not that many left. There's still a few around Vilnius. I think there might be more in the provinces, so as to speak. And above that, I have Iki, which apparently was started by a bunch of Belgians here in Lithuania. It's apparently good for like prepared foods and stuff, which I can't really attest to because I rarely go there. But my problem with it is that it's expensive, even for the same grade of stuff that you would otherwise find in Maxima or Remy. Stuff in Iki just in general tends to be expensive, even if you have the free membership card, which I do definitely recommend getting if you're staying in Lithuania for any length of time and there's an Iki close to you. So get that membership card because it will save you on some costs. For example, one time I got some toilet paper for 50% off, which is insane. But other than that, I don't really recommend going to Iki in general. It's just expensive. But yeah, so with that said, let's get on to some not so expensive supermarkets, which are Maxima and Remy. For me, these two are like kind of the best supermarkets in Lithuania. They're cheap, they're good, they're high quality, and in most cases they are massive. In the case of Maxima and Remy, they both have like small versions which you can find in like the city center. Especially Remy, you can find Remy, I think it's called Remy Express, even in the old town, which is kind of crazy. But Maxima also has kind of a grading system, or rather a size system. It goes from X to 4X. Most of the country only goes up to 3x, but there is one 4x in the whole country, and that is at the Acropolis, in Vilnius. And speaking of Acropolis, that is a chain of malls that you can find in Lithuania and beyond, actually. But in Lithuania, it's called Acropolis. There's, I think, 4 of them in Lithuania. There's one in Vilnius, there's one in Kaunas, there's one in Šiauliai, and then there's one in Klaipėda, and I visited all 4. Now, the reason I say it's mostly in Lithuania is because there's actually 2 more. It goes by the name Akropole, which is in Latvia, or actually more specifically is in Riga. Both of them are in Riga, and in fact not super far from each other. So I actually, while I was staying in Riga for a few days, I actually managed to visit both Acropolis, I guess, in one day. So yeah, this is a kind of chain of malls that is all across Lithuania and Riga. Yeah, that's pretty much. I don't know if there are any outside of Riga in Latvia, actually. So yeah, that is one of the chains. It's a really big one. There's all sorts of things, but one kind of hallmark, thing that you always find in Acropolis or Acropole is an ice skating rink. And often I'll go to a restaurant in Acropolis that's right next to the ice skating rink and just watch people skate, or sometimes they're playing like ice hockey, that kind of stuff, and it's very interesting. Unfortunately, I never once tried it myself because I'm not really a sporty person, let's just say that, and I've never learned how to skate on ice, but yeah, maybe one day I'll do it. I don't really know. But Acropolis was one mall which I frequented, actually, when I stayed in Vilnius. Another one was Ozas, and Ozas also has a big Maxima, even though it's not 4x, it's just 3x, but it's still a pretty big Maxima. They also have a huge selection of restaurants, and one of my favorites is actually Khachapuri, which is a Georgian restaurant. And actually, one thing that's interesting is that my mom visited for 5 days, and in that time, she ate more Georgian food at this Khachapuri than any like Lithuanian food. Like, she did eat like traditional Lithuanian food, but actually she really enjoyed the Georgian food at Khachapuri. So if you ever go to Vilnius and go to Ozas, I highly recommend going to Khachapuri. Although unfortunately I think it's a chain that's only in Vilnius, but I'm sure in other parts of Lithuania you will also find Georgian food, as I did in Kaunas, although it wasn't under the name Khachapuri, it was under some other name, but Georgian food is everywhere in Lithuania. But I will warn you, however, that Acropolis and Ozas are in general quite hard to get to by public transport. You can go there by bus. That's how I get there. In fact, those two malls are just one station apart on the 50 free bus route. But that's well, there's a few buses that can go there, but depending on where you're coming from. But it is kind of challenging to get there because those two malls are very like car friendly. So if you drive, if you've rented a car, then you could easily just drive to these places, and it might actually be better because they have massive car parks that just sit right in front of the malls. So that's something to keep in mind. Otherwise, if you can still take the bus and also just walk through the massive car park to get to the mall. But in general, those two malls are very much like car friendly, and actually, surprisingly, Lithuania itself is surprisingly car friendly, despite the European reputation for 15-minute cities or whatever. So yeah, those are some things to keep in mind. There's other malls as well, like Tup. I think that's how you pronounce it, Tup, and not Cup. I've been there once. I got some boba tea one time, and that was kind of cool. And it's also right on the shore of the river, so that's kind of cool. But I didn't really go there too often, just basically sheerly due to my circumstances. But you might go there more often if you stay there, depending on where you live and stuff like that. But there are quite a few malls, but the main ones I want to talk about, especially in Vilnius, are Acropolis and Ozas. So after that, I want to talk about the airport a little bit. Obviously, if you're arriving into Vilnius, there's a good chance you'll be flying in. I mean, obviously, you could take a train from Warsaw or from Riga, something like that. But if you're arriving anywhere further afield, that is not from Belarus, you probably will be flying in, and I will warn you that Vilnius airport is tiny. I want to say there's at most like 10 gates or something like that. So you don't really need to worry about having to navigate a massive airport after you go for security because you're late or whatever. You probably won't be late, let's just be honest. And depending on how busy the airport is, you might get through security in 5 minutes. So yeah, it's really not a big airport at all, although they are constructing a new terminal, I believe, for departures. And actually, I think from what I saw, they're expecting to complete it by, I think, February next year. So if you visit Vilnius anytime after February of 2025, you might be greeted with a brand new terminal, which is definitely a good thing. I think the airport of Vilnius definitely needs a little upgrade because it is just puny right now. So yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind. And in terms of flights of like where you can go, there's not a lot of places, although there are a few direct flights. But in general, most often, especially if you're booking cheap, you probably go via Warsaw, Riga, or Copenhagen. As you can see here, they correspond to the LOT Airways, Air Baltic, and SAS, because of course those are kind of the flag carriers. Although I don't know if SAS is the flag carrier for Denmark, I'm not entirely sure, but those are really common places you'll go to. For example, for myself, when I went to Eurovision, when I went to Copenhagen, you can actually take just SAS, a direct flight by SAS directly to Copenhagen. However, I looked at the cheapest flights possible, and I found that it's actually cheaper to fly using LOT from from Vilnius to Copenhagen via Warsaw, and in a way this was kind of beneficial, not just because it's cheap, but because when I came back, I actually shared a plane with the Armenian delegation, which I didn't really expect, but the Armenian delegation was flying back to Yerevan via Warsaw, actually. So on my flight from Copenhagen to Warsaw, I actually shared a plane with the Armenian delegation, although I think the artists actually either left early or perhaps still stayed in Copenhagen for a little bit longer. I'm not entirely sure, but they weren't on that plane. So that's Warsaw, and for me, the most frequent transferring point for me was actually Riga, including what was gonna be my last flight back to Vilnius. The original flight was going to be I was in Berlin with a friend, and the original flight was going to be from Berlin to Vilnius via Riga. However, I missed that flight, and I had to get a new flight, which thankfully was a direct flight, so it wasn't. It didn't take too long. It didn't waste too much of my time, but yeah, I ended up not having to stop via Riga airport, but I have stopped via Riga airport multiple times. Ironically, not the time when I was actually staying in Riga, but yeah, if you're in the Baltics, you know, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and you're flying anywhere, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be taking Air Baltic, because it is just the cheapest airline out there, and it is just the most like economically affordable way to go places, and you know, not need to pay a lot for a direct flight to some far-flung place in Europe. So yeah, if you're living in Lithuania and you need to fly places, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be taking Air Baltic. But if you're going to the Nordics like myself, there's a good chance you're also actually going to take SAS. Like for example, when I went to I think Stockholm for Melfest, I think I took SAS there. I think the first time I went to Tampere, I also took SAS, even though you know, in terms of the flying route, it wasn't really economical. It actually went via Copenhagen, I think. Not 100% sure, but yeah, if you're going to the Nordics, there's a pretty good chance you'll be going via SAS, via Copenhagen. So yeah, you can just keep that in mind. But also, Air Baltic sometimes also flies to the Nordics. So for example, the second time I went to Finland, I actually went via Air Baltic. And actually, interestingly, Air Baltic has what it calls Air Baltic cities, which are the Baltic capitals. That is you know, Riga, Vilnius, Tallinn, and then Tampere, which is very interesting considering Tampere is also also has a really tiny airport, but yeah, it's something that's very interesting. I think when I flew back from Tampere to Vilnius, I actually flew via Air Baltic, and I had a like 6-hour layover in Tallinn. So that was interesting. I think that's actually in the vlog. I talked about stuff. I think I actually vlogged while I was kind of waiting for my 6 a.m. flight in Tallinn. But yeah. So if you're booking cheap flights like myself, there's a good chance you'll be flying LOT, Air Baltic, or SAS. Another thing is basketball. Now, a lot of people talk about how Lithuanians love their basketball, and that's absolutely true. But I will say I didn't see that much of it while I was in Lithuania. I think one time I was in a restaurant during a game of Lithuania versus Poland, and really not a lot of people were paying attention to the game, if I'm being honest. But it is kind of the sport that Lithuanians are most proud of. It's the one that they have the most achievements in. And even when I arrived, I was living in a hotel because my dormitory wasn't open yet. when I arrived, right next to my hotel, there was a shop selling Žalgiris merch. And Žalgiris, if you didn't know, is basically the main basketball team in Lithuania. I believe is actually based out of Kaunas, because there is an arena in Kaunas called the Žalgirio Arena, which, by the way, if you didn't know, is I think where Lorraine held her concert in Lithuania. Although that was before I arrived in Lithuania, but it's a massive arena in Kaunas, and I believe it is home to the Žalgiris team. Although, yeah, like I mentioned, I was in Vilnius and I still saw a Žalgiris merch shop right next to my hotel, so yeah, it's a pretty big thing. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind, and probably good to not insult their basketball. And yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. And another thing to keep in mind are some Lithuanian brands. The first two that I want to talk about are Ruta and Džiugas. Ruta are a chocolate company, I believe, and they have their main factory, I think, in Cholet, because I visited there, as in I visited Cholet, and I passed by the Ruta factory multiple times. However, unfortunately, due to my schedule, I arrived there, and both times, when I tried to go, the factory was closed, as in closed for visitors. So that was unfortunate, but I did still manage to go to a Ruta shop somewhere and buy myself some Ruta chocolate. It was pretty good. Although I wouldn't really necessarily say it was anything distinctly Lithuanian about it, but it's still good chocolate. So if you want something kind of touristy or souvenir-y to give back to your friends, that may be an option. And another option could be Džiugas cheese. Džiugas in Lithuanian folklore, I believe, is some sort of giant, but that's the extent of how much I know about this mythological figure. But yeah, Džiugas nowadays is a brand of cheese and is mostly hard cheese. Basically, you kind of like think kind of Parmesan or Pecorino, that kind of stuff, but they usually sell it in little pouches, although they do sell like little wedges. If you want to get a whole wedge, that's totally fine as well, but they also sell versions that are crumbled, which is how I usually buy it, and also versions that are shredded, basically, and also slices, I think. But even when I was about to go home from Vilnius, I actually went to Maxima and bought myself a pack of crumbled Džiugas cheese, and I kind of snacked on it during my flight back home, and it was great. And you can also use it in all sorts of things, obviously, in the same way you would use any other hard cheese. It actually melts surprisingly well, I would say, although it's definitely not like mozzarella. You're not going to get a cheese pull or anything, but it's still a pretty good cheese. So if you like cheese, if you like to, support Lithuanian brands, you can try out Džiugas. And I believe you can also get Džiugas in other Maximas across the Baltics. I think I've seen Džiugas in both Tallinn and Riga, in Maxima, that is. And so if you're in those places, you can definitely give Džiugas a try as well, although definitely the selection will be a lot more limited. And the final Lithuanian brand I want to talk about, which you might be surprised to hear, is NordVPN. Now, this video isn't sponsored. My channel isn't sponsored. I wish it was, but Nord, the company Nord Security, is actually based in Vilnius. I'm pretty sure it is a fully Lithuanian company. One time when me and some other students were going out for dinner, actually it was like a Lunar New Year type of dinner. There were a bunch of Koreans as well. we went out for dinner, and near the kind of Chinese restaurant, there was a building that said Nord on it. And yes, it is the exact same Nord that gave rise to NordVPN. Now, I don't know if NordVPN itself is based in Lithuania or Vilnius even, but I do know that the headquarters of Nord itself is in Vilnius, because I've passed by that building several times. So yeah, a little fun fact there for you. NordVPN is possibly Lithuanian, but Nord, the mother company, definitely is Lithuanian. So, yeah, that's just a little fun fact for you about Lithuania. And in terms of restaurants, there's a lot of restaurants, obviously, in Lithuania, but for me, the ones that I most frequently went to are at Nodvaras, which is a very solid kind of traditional Lithuanian food type place. And another one is Grill London, which is a surprisingly economical place which sells kind of grilled meats and stuff. And there's also Casa della Pasta, which is an Italian place, unsurprisingly. But I think, at least in my very non-Italian view, I think their Italian food is actually pretty good, especially for what you're going to be able to get in a place as far from Italy as Lithuania. So those are a few to keep in mind. I don't really have recommendations necessarily, but again, like I mentioned, for Grill London, you can get an entire set. That is, you can have meat, a kind of salad or vegetable type deal, and then a side dish, usually kind of some sort of potato-based thing, and then also a sauce, all for maybe 10 euros, maybe slightly more. That's, of course, sans drink. You can get tap water for free. Or you can get some other drinks like beer or cider or whatever. Although, actually, on the topic of drinks, really quick, Lithuanians do not know how to make a milkshake. Like, if you're thinking of milkshakes, you think of thick milkshakes from, like, Five Guys or Shake Shack or whatever, right? But for some reason, in Lithuania and possibly just Eastern Europe in general, they do not know how to make a milkshake. They call them, I believe, milk cocktails or something like that, or shake cocktails, something like that. It's and it's a very bubbly, frothy mess that has nowhere near the amount of thickness. Oh, sorry, they call it ice cream cocktail, which really, really throws you off, but it's kind of their quote-unquote interpretation of a milkshake, but it is also absolutely nothing like a milkshake, because it is not thick at all. It's frothy, it's thin, and in general just disappointing. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well if you're visiting Lithuania, is that they do not have good milkshakes. I'm sorry, but it's true. Anyways, so that is kind of my list of specifically Lithuanian things, but I'm about to get even more specific because I'm going to talk about some Lithuanian food and drink. So the first one I want to talk about is šaltibarščiai, which literally translates to cold borscht, and that is kind of what it is, but also not completely. Like, if you think of borscht, you think of the Ukrainian stuff, it's like very dark red, almost maroon type color, but it's also like watery and stuff like that. Well, šaltibarščiai, in addition to being cold, it's also very bright pink and slightly thick, I believe. I'm not sure what is really thickened by, but it is thick, definitely a lot thicker than what you would imagine like Ukrainian borscht to be. But yeah, it is cold borscht. It's a very cool concept. I believe in Poland they have something similar called chłopnik litewski, I think, something like that. Chłopnik litewski, which means like basically Lithuanian cold soup, and that is kind of what it is. It's like kind of the national dish of Lithuania almost. Every Lithuanian you talk to will swear by this stuff, but I don't really care. Like, I'm sure this is going to piss off some Lithuanians, but I've never really cared for these kinds of beet type soups. I'm not even sure if Chante Marché is even made with beets, but like I get why you'd like it, based surely off of like nostalgia, and that's kind of what you grew up with. But to me, it just kind of tastes like nothing. And honestly, like this sounds harsh, but honestly, the boiled egg in there is probably the most interesting thing about the entire soup. Like at least flavorized. Like I think visually it's very interesting, but when you taste it, it really doesn't taste like much, even though it promises a lot in terms of the appearance. So that's just my opinion on it. You can obviously disagree. If you grew up with these kinds of beet type soups, you might like it a lot more than I do. But I'm from somewhere which actually uses spices, so yeah, unfortunately I'm not that big into the stuff. But again, you probably disagree. So that's Chante Marché. That's one thing that's very often talked about when it comes to Lithuanian cuisine. Another thing that's commonly talked about is pig ears. I think Western Europeans and especially white Americans have this aversion towards offal of any kind. That's why they kind of make a big deal out of pig ears, which is pretty traditional in Lithuanian cuisine. It's usually eaten cold, but the preparation method is just that I don't really know how they prepare it, but to my understanding, they just kind of pluck out the hairs and season it, and maybe I think they boil it probably, but I'm not entirely sure even. But it's really often made out to be a big deal, and it's something that you have to open your mind to it because it doesn't taste awful, right? That was kind of a pun, but yeah. Plot twist. We have our own way of preparing pig ears. So, like over here in East Asia, not all parts of East Asia, obviously, but just around my kind of region, we have our way of preparing pig ears, and I can confidently say our way of preparing it is a lot more flavorful than the way they would make it in Lithuania. So it's fine. I'm used to the texture. I know what it tastes like and feels like on the tongue, and I appreciate that they tried to make it not bland, but they kind of failed still in that respect. But yeah, it is a thing. If you've had pig ears before, prepare to be disappointed by Lithuanian pig ears, but that's just something to keep in mind, because like it's not even that savory. I think I saw a video like of suggesting it should be used for as a kind of beer snack, and I would kind of disagree because that kind of stuff is just not savory enough for that kind of stuff. For being a beer snack. But there is another beer snack that I want to talk about later that is very, very good. But for now, let's move on to Cepeline or Dishkuklie or Dishkukulie. I don't even know. I rarely use the second name, but that's the name they use in Endodvaras. But in general, it's more commonly known as Cepeline, and it's basically a kind of potato dumpling that is shaped into vaguely the shape of a zeppelin. That's what Cepeline means. It means zeppelins. And I think one reason they're usually listed in the plural is because they're usually served at least as 2 or sometimes maybe 4 even. But what I think of them is that they are actually shockingly good, despite how simple they may sound. For example, my mom was actually kind of skeptical of these cepeline because she'd had potato dumplings before in Russia, and she was skeptical whether these would be better, and actually she was converted to them almost, and she thought they were really good. But in my opinion, there's a big issue with this, is that eventually it does get kind of one note, kind of monotone, I guess, and it's also really, really heavy because the traditional pairing with cepeline are basically crackling sauce with sour cream, and so it's just fat on fat, and even the dumpling itself is kind of fatty. So in the end, it just gets really, really heavy. But as far as traditional Lithuanian foods go, I would say cepelinai are actually genuinely really good. So if you're here, I'm not even there anymore, but if you're in Lithuania, definitely try it out, preferably at a place like Endodvaras. So after that, in terms of food, this isn't really a food, it's more just kind of like a snack or even a sweet. It's surelis, which surelis literally translates to little cheese, but one good translation that I've seen of it is cheesecake bar. It does vaguely taste like the kind of cream cheese component of cheesecake bar, but it's kind of made out of quark, or basically I want to say, yeah, it's not really cream cheese. It's more kind of like cheese curds, but also not in the same way as the North American cheese curds. But yeah, what you get basically is a little bar with what tastes like the cheesecake filling, and then wrapped in a little kind of chocolate shell. And I would say it's really good, but don't eat way too many of them. I think like there's so many choices of them that you'd want to grab like 4 or 5, but there's a few problems with that. First off, if you don't have a fridge, these things literally melt as you're taking them out to check out. So they melt really easily, and by the time you get back to your place of residence, they're probably already one soggy mess. So there's that. And second, if you're like me, you bought like 4 of them, and you don't have a fridge or freezer to store them in, you have to eat like 3 or 4 in a day, and you will burn yourself out. And pretty much ever since day 3 of arriving in Vilnius, I did not touch them for at least 6 weeks or something like that. And even when I got one when I came back to Vilnius in the last days of August and I tasted it, I was like, ugh. So yeah, just they are good if you don't burn yourself out on them. So just keep that in mind. Don't buy too many, obviously, because it's a sweet and, you know, there's calories there and stuff, but also because it's very easy to burn yourself out on them. So just have it in moderation, and I think it's probably a pretty good dessert. And speaking of dessert, tingenis, which is a kind of chocolate cake with biscuit bits in them, and my simple opinion is that it probably looks a lot better than it tastes, because the way it's made, it's actually kind of rolled up into a chocolate salami, is the way some people have described it. It's rolled up into a kind of sausage-like shape, and then when it's to be served, it's kind of sliced, again, kind of like salami, but it's more kind of like a chocolate cake with little bits of biscuit in it, and I'll just be honest, it looks way better than it tastes. It's kind of mediocre. After that, you have blini, which are just pancakes. I don't have much else to add. There are different like traditional toppings, but at its core, it really is just pancakes. However, this is not the same with žemaičių blini, which are a kind of potato pancake. And I think one really good comparison to be made would be the draniki from Belarus. It's actually quite a similar thing, except in the case of žemaičių blini, there's even a little bit of a meat filling in them, and so that actually makes it, I would say, far more substantial than regular blini. Although that's probably something that you should have with a side dish as opposed to just eating them plain, basically. So that's something like that. Žemaičių blini, good, but probably served with a side dish, so it's not as one note. So after that, you have kefyras, which is, I know it's not really strictly Lithuanian, but it is made in Lithuania. There are companies in Lithuania making it. So yeah, it's kefir. You can find it all over Eastern Europe, to be quite honest. But I'm sorry, I don't like it. It's just strange to imagine a savory yogurt drink, in my opinion. I've had it before. well, I had it in Lithuania, and I'll be honest, I did not massively enjoy it, unfortunately. But yeah, I had it once, and I don't think I really want to have it again. Again, it's just cultural differences. I'm sure if Lithuanians come to East Asia, there's probably things you'll find weird as well in our culture, and that's totally fine. After that, we have mushroom soup. That's not strictly a Lithuanian thing, but it is very much iconically Lithuanian because traditionally Lithuanians really like going to pick mushrooms. There's even a specific word to mean to pick mushrooms, that is grybauti, which is a verb specifically meaning to pick mushrooms, as opposed to having two words for it like in English. So yeah, mushrooms are actually pretty big in Lithuanian culture, thus and hence mushroom soup. But flavor-wise, it's not massively different from mushroom soup that you'd get elsewhere. But yeah, I like mushroom soup in general, so naturally I liked this. But this was also the hard way where I found out I'm allergic to rye, because at Notvaras, the Lithuanian place that I mentioned earlier, they serve mushroom soup with a rye bread bowl, and that sounds really cool and stuff, and it really does look cool, I'll be honest. But if you're allergic to rye, please don't eat the whole thing. And at the time I didn't know I was allergic to rye, so I ate the whole thing, and boom, I started growing rashes the same way I grew rashes for shrimp or prawns. So, yeah, like I said, if you're allergic to rye, don't eat the entire bread bowl, but otherwise, mushroom soup, very good. After that, you have keptadona, or keptintadona, I believe is also called. It literally just translates to fried bread, but usually this is a dish of strips of rye bread that are fried and then fried until crispy, and then it is topped or sometimes put on the side with a sauce of cheese and garlic, and actually that is really, really good. Probably one of my favorite things in Lithuania, if I'm being honest, and to the point where even though I am allergic to rye, I sometimes still order it at restaurants because it is just an insanely good beer snack, or just a snack in general. So if you have some beer, if you just want a snack to go with it, I strongly recommend getting some keptadona or keptintadona. You can find it in supermarkets as well, although I don't think they necessarily come with the cheese and garlic sauce, but it's still a really tasty treat, very savory, very delicious. So keptadona, strongly recommend it, as long as you're not allergic to rye as I am. So the final one I want to talk about is shakotis, which is the tree cake in traditional Lithuanian cuisine, although I believe it is also a thing in Polish cuisine. I think it's called a senkacz, but is actually more associated with Lithuania these days, the tree cake called shakotis, which you can actually buy very readily in supermarkets these days. And one time I did, when I was, I believe, in Cholet, and I bought it, and then I went to Riga, and I had to finish the whole thing in Riga because I had to take a bus to Tallinn, and it was very unwieldy, let's just say, to go to take a bus with 2 pieces of luggage and a shakotis. But yeah, I was kind of underwhelmed by it, because on the surface it really looks like it's gonna be crispy and well, not chewy, but it was gonna be crispy and crunchy and stuff like that. But no, it's actually a bit heavier and drier than I expected, although as some people have pointed out, it's actually probably gonna go pretty well if you get some milk or coffee or something like that. So if you have that, definitely try that combination, some coffee and or milk with Shakotis, I think it would turn out pretty well. Although I do strongly caution against eating an entire Shakotis in one go. It's not a great experience, and I can still taste the Shakotis in my mouth to this day, even though it's been 2 months to the day. So yeah, Shakotis alright, but drier and heavier than I expected. So that said, let's move away from Lithuania, and quite literally, because I'm going to talk kind of about my travels during Eurovision season and kind of before then. So the first thing is, from Lithuania, if you want to go anywhere outside of Poland and Latvia, you pretty much have to fly. And it depends on where you're flying, because sometimes if you're from, for example, if you're in Cholet, it's actually probably closer to go to Riga airport, because one of my friends actually lives in Cholet, and they actually when they went to Eurovision in concert in Amsterdam, they actually went to Riga airport and then flew from there to Amsterdam. But I'm in Vilnius, or I was in Vilnius, so usually I fly from Vilnius out, and usually it's from Air Baltic, but sometimes it's SAS. And when it's Air Baltic, it usually goes, there's usually a little bit of a layover in Riga. However, I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking SAS if you're someone who packs a lot of stuff, especially like myself. I usually have a pretty bulky piece of carry-on luggage, and it's kind of inconvenient when you take SAS, because the overhead locker of SAS planes generally tend to be pretty small, and usually you have to really push hard for the luggage to even fit in there, or the best case scenario actually is if you can get the luggage to be kind of checked into the luggage cabin where they usually have checked baggage. If you can do that, then great, but if you can't, you have to exert quite a bit of force to fit your piece of luggage in the overhead locker, which has rather limited space. So in general, I don't really recommend flying with SAS, but I think they're probably still better than Finnair. So yeah, in terms of places I went to a lot of places. In order, I think that would be Tampere for UMK, Klaipėda for Eurovision-LT, Stockholm for Melfest weekend, the pre-party, and also Melody Festival in itself. Then I think I went to Kaunas for a week to kind of rest up during Easter. But after that, I came back to Vilnius, packed my stuff, and I went to Barcelona for the Barcelona Eurovision party. I believe it's also called BCN. And then, after that, I went to Amsterdam for Eurovision in concert, which was a great time. And then I went to Gothenburg for my first ever Cornelia Jacobs gig. Then I went to Copenhagen. For Eurovision. Then I went to Copenhagen for Eurovision itself, and also the Malmö-Hagen pre-party, and also my second Cornelia Jacobs gig. And then after that, I actually also went to a lot of places, but this time not necessarily for Eurovision purposes, but in order, if I can remember it in my head, because I didn't write it down in the slide. It'll be on the slide. You're probably looking at it right now, but I haven't written it down. But off the top of my head, in June, after my exams, I actually went to Ljubljana, that is Slovenia, the capital of Slovenia, because originally my friend was going to go as well, because there was going to be a Raven meet and greet, but in the end I kind of went by myself because my friend had to study for an exam. So I went by myself, and I went to Ljubljana for the meet and greet, but that wasn't the only thing I did. I had a great time in Ljubljana, by the way, and it was also, by the way, my second time in Ljubljana, because unbeknownst to most of you, I've actually been to the Balkans before. in a very bizarre package tour which completely missed out Serbia. It literally kind of just went around Serbia, even going to Montenegro. But anyways, back on topic. I went to Ljubljana. I had a great time there, and then after that, I went kind of north. I took a Flixbus from Ljubljana to Vienna because Taya and Luke Black were doing a gig in Vienna, and it was gonna be my first time going to Vienna, and I actually am in a group chat which kind of stands Taya and Selena, so. It was my first time going to a gig with Taya in it, and I actually met Taya in person, and she's just super, super nice. So that was kind of the last really Eurovision-related trip that I went to, and obviously Luke Black was amazing as well. So that was those were my only travels in June, I believe, and then after that I went back to Vilnius, obviously, to kind of finish off my semester at Vilnius University, and then after that, at the end of June, or actually precisely in the last 5 days ish, I left Vilnius through a rather convoluted process because I missed my first train there because I had a hangover on the day I was supposed to move out of the dormitory, so that was fun. And then after that, I went to Cholet because, like I mentioned, one of my friends lives there, and I visited them, and also we had a meal together. And then after that, I officially left Lithuania, and I took. It was going to be a train, but I missed the train because it's an 8 a.m. and I do not do well with mornings. So I took a Flixbus, I think it was, to Riga, and then from Riga, I stayed there for a few days, and that was kind of the beginning of my European trip. And then after that, I continued going through the Baltics, and I went to Tallinn. From Tallinn, actually, I took a bus to Tallinn. It was actually a pretty good bus, and it was actually recommended by one of my Lithuanian classmates who had done a semester in Tartu, apparently. So I took a pretty good bus from Riga to Tallinn, and then from Tallinn, I also stayed there for a few days. Actually, my hostel was very close to the old town, and I had a great time. I also watched several Euro games, Euro 24 games, just in the old town square because they were like broadcasting it there. And then from Tallinn, I actually took a cruise from there to Stockholm because that's a thing. I mentioned it earlier, I think. I took a basically less than 24-hour cruise, but it was still a very interesting experience because I hadn't been on a cruise for more than 10 years at this point. But then I arrived in Stockholm. I had an amazing time in Stockholm. Great food, great people, great infrastructure. And then from there, I think I took a flight to Amsterdam because as much as I didn't want to take a plane because it was getting expensive, planes were actually probably the cheapest way I could go within a reasonable time anyway to Amsterdam from Stockholm. But yeah, so I flew SAS from Stockholm to Amsterdam, and then in Amsterdam I stayed for a couple of days. It was a really, really good time there. I really enjoyed my time in Amsterdam, and then from there I think I was originally going to go to the Czech Republic, going to Prague, but then I kind of realized throughout the 6 months that I stayed in Vilnius, I had not once visited Poland, so I decided instead to go to Warsaw, and I had a great time in Warsaw as well. And then from Warsaw, surprisingly, it was actually the same price to Flixbus from there to Vienna as it was to Flixbus to Vienna from Prague. So yeah, I took a Flixbus to Vienna, and I spent my last few days in kind of continental Europe there, and from there I took a Lufthansa flight to Glasgow, where I stayed for 3 weeks. Although I had some passport issues in Vienna, not actually in Vienna, in Frankfurt, and then either way, I arrived in Glasgow, and I had an amazing time in Glasgow, and also went up to Edinburgh for a little bit to visit one of my friends. And then from there, after I stayed for 3 weeks in August in Glasgow, I then traveled to Berlin, and then met another friend there, and then from there, I took a flight back to Vilnius, and then back home. So that's a lot of traveling, and so I have a few travel tips in general. The first one is, don't be an idiot and go for expensive hotels. Now, there are a lot of ways to save money on trips, one of which is don't go for more expensive hotels than absolutely necessary. Like, you do not need to have a mini bar in your hotel room, right? You can just get a really cheap hotel. Like, one that I really recommend is Ibis Budget. That one's really cheap. There's probably other budget hotels out there, but I stayed in multiple Ibis budgets throughout my stays. Or there are other kind of similarly cheap hotels around that kind of general price range. But in general, I do not recommend staying in expensive hotels, especially if you're only going to stay for 1 or 2 nights, because you're not going to be able to fully appreciate the facilities of that hotel, because like there are a lot of things at a hotel which you do not need, and which leads me also to my second point, which is, if there's something that you don't need at a hotel, then maybe just get something which doesn't have that facility, because you're saving money by not having to fund that facility which you're not going to use. So for example, for Poland, for Warsaw, I briefly contemplated just getting an Airbnb because it was cheaper, and also it didn't have any of the facilities that I wasn't going to use, like the laundry service, like the gym or anything like that. And that's definitely an option. But in the end, I went for Ibis Budget because I had been staying in hostels for more than 10 days at that point, and I just wanted a proper bed to sleep in again, so I went for Ibis Budget in Warsaw. But, for example, if you're staying in a place for a longer term, I really do suggest going for example, like I said, an Airbnb. For example, that's what I had in Glasgow, for example. I stayed for 3 weeks in an Airbnb, because you can do a lot more in an Airbnb than in most hotel rooms. For example, you can do cooking and stuff like that, and you can also wash your own clothes without any extra costs. So yeah, it really just depends on what you need, what you want, and what you have, like as in terms of economically what you have. So basically, based on that, go for something that suits your needs, basically. And like I mentioned in the third point, there's this divide or debate, I suppose, between hotel, Airbnb, and hostel, and really just depends on what you're looking for, what you need, what you can afford, so on and so forth. I will say, however, if a place has really bad reviews on like Google Maps or just on the Airbnb site, maybe believe them. So for example, when I was in Amsterdam, the first hostel that I had booked, it was right in the middle of the city center, but looking at the reviews, I had to scroll for like 21 straight reviews before it got to one that was higher than 2 stars, and the majority of those reviews were just 1 star, and a lot of them complained about all sorts of things, like unruly roommates and people randomly entering their room without permission or even knocking. And yeah, I was stood outside of that hostel for like, I want to say 2 hours, but in the end I just chickened out and I booked another much better rated hostel that was kind of out of town, and I had an amazing time at that hostel. So, despite it being quite far out of the city center, so yeah, if people say stuff about things and there's a consensus, maybe believe them. So, if you're booking something, definitely look up the reviews first. Even if it is cheap, I think it is still good to try to look for something good within the cheaper ranges. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Speaking of saving money, you should probably try local cuisine within reason. I think it's really good to try local cuisine wherever you go. But the reason I say within reason is because I once had this extremely tourist trappy place in Tallinn, in the center of the old town, actually. And a lot of the stuff they were selling did absolutely look traditional, but it was also insanely expensive. Now, I'll level with you. I don't really know where else you would be able to find this kind of traditional cuisine, because I'll be honest, I don't think this is the kind of cuisine even locals would go out to eat anyway. But I would definitely say try to avoid tourist traps if within reason. If it's close to you and you can stomach that cost, then you can go for it. But still, it's not going to leave you with that good of a taste in your mouth, pun intended, because I had blood sausage actually, and I'll just be honest, it was not that good, and it cost me, I want to say, at least 18 euros, something like that. And if you ask me, it absolutely was not worth it. But yeah, so within reason, if the local cuisine is cheap or at least moderately priced, you should definitely try it. For example, when I went to Tampere, I knew that they had a unique pastry called the barametsi. I've talked about it a few times at this point, but it is quite adequately priced, so I happily tried it, and it was pretty good. And yeah, so within reason, you should definitely try local cuisine, and you might be surprised at what you find. So on that topic, you should also try local products that you can get at supermarkets. So, for example, if there's a local brand of, let's say, cheese, for example, I would definitely recommend trying that as opposed to something that was made elsewhere. So, for example, in Lithuania, if you want cheese, if you want to make, I don't know, carbonara or something, you don't have to use, pecorino or parmesan or something like that. You can absolutely just try out using Jugas cheese. This is not sponsored. I wish I was, but that's exactly what I did with my carbonara, and in my opinion, it turned out great. So yeah, I would say try to support local businesses, try local products, that kind of stuff. That's definitely what I recommend. And the next two, I would say, are more geared towards Americans. That is, the first one being use public transport, because in the US, public transport isn't really a thing. Decades of lobbying, or even centuries of lobbying at this point, have made it so the car companies win out, the tire companies, the gas giants or whatever, they have won out, and they are kind of what Americans tend to go with when they're traveling around, they're driving, and that doesn't really carry over to Europe. So in general, public transport is actually pretty robust in Europe, I would say, again, with the exception of Lithuania, but even then, the buses in Lithuania are still pretty good. So I would recommend, definitely, if you want to go places, I definitely strongly recommend taking a bus, taking the tram, taking the metro, if the city has that. So I would strongly recommend doing that. It's a lot cheaper usually than renting a car, and oftentimes it's probably faster because especially with cities like London, it's very easily congested, and so it's definitely just easier to get like a train or metro or sometimes even a taxi, which would be faster. But in general, I would strongly recommend getting public transport, especially if you're someone like myself who doesn't even know how to drive. So I would strongly recommend that, unless you have to get somewhere in a hurry, in which case you can get like a taxi or a Bolt or Uber or something like that. But in general, I would caution against renting a car unless you're in Lithuania and you want to visit a mall. So that's the first thing about kind of transatlantic differences. The second difference is contactless. Now, it depends on the country, but in general, I would say the vast majority of Europe is geared towards contactless now. That includes all sorts of things. It can be a credit card, debit card, Google Pay, Apple Pay, anything like that. And that's actually also what I'm massively in favor of. It's just much more convenient, to be quite honest. I think there surely are like economic reasons to be cautious of it, but for me, I'm just prioritizing convenience over everything. And so for me, it's great that Europe has embraced contactless payment, and so that's why I would recommend absolutely use your credit card or debit card when you're in Europe. It's going to be a lot easier, I think, than bringing around wads of cash. So, yeah, that's definitely something I recommend. However, like I said, it does depend on the specific country. I would say the country where I used the most cash has definitely got to be Germany. Partly because I had already run out of money in my debit card, but also partly because in Germany, even though a lot of places have now started adopting contactless, their machines can get kind of weird. Like at multiple places now, I think like 3 or 4 places, my debit card was just outright rejected for no reason, and in the end, I've determined it was just faster for me to get out a few coins or get out a few euro banknotes and stuff like that. So it really depends on the country, but especially Germany really loves their cash. But other than Germany, I think a lot of places really are gearing towards contactless now, not least Lithuania. You can pay a lot of things by card or by Google Pay, that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you're from especially America and you think that Europe is still really backwards and use cash all the time, that's really not the case. If anything, I would say Americans probably use more cash than the average European. That isn't German, of course. But yeah, in general, I think in Europe you should probably learn to use contactless, be it a credit card, debit card, Google Pay, Apple Pay, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the main differences, I would say, between kind of American and European attitudes towards these kind of things. And the last few are again, travel tips. The first one being you should probably try to spend more time at the airport or transport terminal than to miss your transport links. I'm just saying this from experience. Do not, by any circumstance, think that you have more time than you actually do. And again, it's rather probably a better idea for you to get to a place even way too early rather than to miss the thing that you're having to take. So, for example, one time I was going from Amsterdam to Warsaw via Flixbus. The problem is I only barely got to the Flixbus station literally at the same minute the bus was about to depart, and I went there. The door was still open, the luggage thing was still open, and I knocked on the door, and the driver was just like, no. I think his exact word was nebuvo, which is Lithuanian, which I don't know why that's the case, because I didn't look Lithuanian. The bus wasn't going to Lithuania, but whatever. Anyways, I was rejected off that bus, and I tried to argue about it to the officials, but I didn't really get any thing back in general. So yeah, I would say definitely spend more time at the airport or Flixbus station or whatever it is. And this also applies especially to idiots like myself who sometimes set reminders in another time zone but forget to change the time zone to catch the plane. So for Berlin, I was supposed to have the flight at 1940 in Berlin time, but I booked that flight when I was in Glasgow. So in my mind, I had converted it to 2040. But the problem is my calendar doesn't change time zones. So when I got to Berlin, it was still listed as 2040, and so in my mind I thought the flight was at 2040, and so I arrived, I think, around 8 p.m. Partly because my train was delayed for a few minutes, classic Deutsche Bahn. But I arrived around 8 p.m. only to find out the flight wasn't even there anymore because it had departed 20 minutes ago. So definitely be careful with your bookings in general, especially if you're going across time zone boundaries, and also check whether your calendar adjusts for time zones. So just keep that in mind, and again, rather spend a bit more time at the airport or station or whatever than to just outright miss the bus, train, plane, whatever. So you'll maybe arrive for your flights like 3 hours in advance, and also I would say be careful of how much or how little time you have left, especially for flights, because when I was in Glasgow, one way I missed my flight ridiculously was because while I was there, I actually arrived early because I missed the airport bus and I went for an Uber direct to the airport. So I actually arrived early, but then I thought I had more time than I actually did, and I just chilled at the Greg's, eating a sausage roll and drinking a beer that I didn't have time to drink at the apartment. And I thought I had more time than I did, only to go through security, the shockingly large airport, to arrive at the gate mere minutes before takeoff, only to be told that the plane, the boarding had been closed, and I was apparently called 3 or 4 times, which I couldn't hear in the security. So yeah, again, time is the thing here. Try as much as possible, within reason, to get to your gate, your station, as early as possible, basically. And speaking of that kind of stuff, if you have the time but you don't have the money, try Flixbus. In most cases, it's going to be cheaper than whatever you take, especially if you're traveling across like continental Europe. It's probably going to be cheaper than whatever other transport link you're going to take. Again, with the exception of flying from Stockholm to Amsterdam, apparently it's actually more expensive and it takes more time. So definitely in that case, I would recommend just flying there by SAS or whatever. But in general, especially if you're not going that far, I think I would definitely recommend taking Flixbus, or if it is cheaper, you might even consider getting a train. So those are just some of my travel tips, especially with regards to traveling in Europe. And finally, well, not finally, but we're nearing the end of the video now. You must be sighing a breath of relief at this point. There are a few regrets that I have about my time in Europe. The first one is not getting cheaper hotels. See the first point in my previous slide as well. But the main thing I want to highlight here that I forgot to mention in the previous section is when I stayed in The Hague, I went to Amsterdam. Well, I didn't stay in Amsterdam. I went to Amsterdam for Eurovision in concert, but I actually stayed in The Hague because my friend also lived in The Hague, and I just wanted to stay somewhere near, and I ended up going to the Moxie Hotel in The Hague, which is a fun kind of fancy little hotel, but it's also pretty expensive, and in hindsight it's really not a place that I needed to be at. I could have just gotten a cheaper hotel a bit further from the train station, but what's done is done, and if I had the hindsight, I would probably go for some cheaper hotel rather than going for the Moxie, which is rather expensive. My second regret is having to spend way too much money on getting Bolts or taxis. Now, again, this calls back to my point of spending more time at the airport or transport terminal. So I would say, in general, just try to plan out what you need to do in advance a little bit more. Don't leave it until the last minute, because at the last minute you won't have enough time and you'll have to take a taxi, or worse, you'll try to take the taxi only to be late anyway, and that has happened to me on at least 3 or 4 occasions, and in some cases it's not really even necessary. I could have just not showed up to the class, and sometimes I just took a Bolt to class for no reason other than the fact that I had money, and in hindsight that's a terrible idea, but in general you can save a lot of money if you just plan your travels in advance and go somewhere earlier than you expected to, because it just saves you money basically. And I also forgot to mention in the Lithuania section that in general, instead of getting an Uber, what you want to do is probably get a Bolt, because those are cheaper and those are also a lot more widespread than Ubers in at least Vilnius. I don't really know about other cities in Lithuania, but I imagine this much the same. But Bolt is kind of the preferred ride-sharing service basically in Lithuania and in a lot of Europe actually. But Bolt is an Estonian company, I think, and so that's why it's particularly widespread in the Baltics. So that's another thing you can keep in mind if you go to Lithuania. You can, instead of calling an Uber, you can absolutely go for a Bolt instead, and that's mostly what I did when I needed to get one. But in general, it's just a better idea to plan ahead and not need to call for a Bolt in general. So, on that topic, having to spend the money on getting Bolts, sometimes this also entailed, or rather extended to other things. For example, missing a train to Cholet and then missing my train to Riga. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I missed my first train to Cholet because I was hungover on the day I was supposed to move out of my dormitory. The night before then, I had drunken 2 10% ABV cans of canned cocktail, and I was legitimately hungover the next day, and I had trouble no, I didn't really have trouble walking, but I had trouble really getting myself composed and moving out of the dormitory. But in any case, I missed my first train to Cholet, so I kind of had to snobbishly go back to the dormitory for one more night, because trains to Cholet are literally 1 per day, I think, or either way, I wasn't able to book another one on the same day, so I missed my first train to Cholet, and in the sense that I was at the door of the dormitory, and I realized I wouldn't even make it to the train on time, even if I took a Bolt. So that was my first train missing. The second one was my train to Riga. Now, like I mentioned, you can take a train to Riga and then fly from there to different places if you live in Cholet, but in general, obviously I didn't do that, but there's also other ways to get to Riga. You can take a bus, you can take Flixbus or something like that. And that's exactly what I had to do because I missed my train to Riga. I checked out of the hotel in Cholet, and then it's more like I think they call it a guest house, and I certainly felt it through the lack of air conditioning. But I checked out of the place. and I missed my train basically because I do not do well with mornings. But the problem is the only train to Riga. Again, this is kind of a once per day thing. The only train to Riga from Cholet actually runs at 8 a.m. So, yeah, I do not do well with mornings, and actually that day I actually was awake, but I almost kind of just vaguely fell asleep again. I don't even really remember what happened there, but yeah, basically I missed my train to Riga after missing my train to Cholet, but at least this time I was able to get a Flixbus to get to Riga relatively on time-ish. It wasn't very far anyway because the distances aren't that huge, but it still stung to know that I had wasted my money on the train ticket. After that, another thing I regretted was wasting money on a cheap and genuinely bad hostel in Amsterdam. Now, I'm not going to reveal what the name of the hostel is because I just don't want to do that. Basically, I'm not that kind of person. But I will say, if you find a hostel in Amsterdam that has about 20 consecutive reviews that were 2-star or lower, that's probably the one. It was cheap, sure, but it also got insanely bad reviews. The facilities were bad, apparently, and there were random people doing random things without their permission. And so, in my mind, the main regret is that because I was kind of debating between this hostel and another hostel, which was a lot better, but it was also way out of town. And in the end, I decided on this one kind of on a faith-based thing. I had faith in the place actually not being that terrible, but it was terrible. And in the end, I didn't even go into the building because it was on the second floor. And I had two big, heavy pieces of luggage. Two big heavy pieces of luggage, and I just really did not feel like hauling those up to the second floor and then having to live in a probably smelly and suspicious place almost for 6 days. So I just wasn't in that mood. So in the end, I just booked the other hostel, which I can heartily recommend, by the way. It's called Via Amsterdam, and I think Via actually has hostels in other parts of Europe as well, but the one I stayed at was in Amsterdam, and it was actually really good. The facilities were really good. They had a kitchen, they had their own restaurant even, and their sleeping facilities were hotel quality because they do also have hotel rooms, and I heartily recommend that hostel. It's called Via Amsterdam. It's just spelled VIA, or you can say Via, I suppose. And they even have bike renting services, which I used once, and it was a lot of fun because I actually biked from the hostel all the way to the city center, and again, just a lot of fun. So, yeah, my regret here is mainly that I should have just gone straight to Via Amsterdam as opposed to trying that cheap but poorly reviewed hostel at first. So, staying in Amsterdam, another regrets that I have is that I slept a lot. That's usually that's not really a bad thing. It's always good to have some sleep, but in my case, I slept so much that oftentimes I would only leave the hostel around like 4 or 5 p.m. And by that point, a lot of stuff has closed, like museums and stuff like that. And so I really didn't get to see as much of Amsterdam and Stockholm as much as I hoped I would do. And if I ever do another kind of European trip, I'm definitely revisiting these two cities as well as Berlin. These are some really interesting cities, I think, in Europe, and definitely deserve a lot more attention from my part in terms of like sightseeing and stuff like that. And speaking of sightseeing, I really wanted to go to the Haus der Musik in Vienna because that place has a lot of music related stuff, classical music related stuff, and I'm actually classically trained. Just well, kind of really. It's not that much. I only have grade 5 in ABRSM with clarinet. Piano and music theory, so I am kind of musically trained classically, and so that's one thing I really wanted to see. However, I only knew about the Haus der Musik on the last day I was in Vienna, and by the time I had got there, they told me that the place was closed. So that was a shame, and I really wanted to go to the place, but I guess that will have to wait until the next time I go to Vienna. So, speaking of German-speaking countries, I had a bit of an issue in Frankfurt when I was going from Vienna to Glasgow. Now, see, I mentioned this earlier, but basically, at the end of my student visa, turns out I was expected to leave the entirety of the EU as opposed to just leaving Lithuania. Now, I thought I just needed to leave Lithuania and it will be fine, but obviously they don't have a way to prove that you left the EU, or really Lithuania even, because they don't check passports between borders within the EU, that is. So I actually didn't know that I had to leave the entirety of the EU as opposed to just Lithuania, and in the end, because of that, I was determined as overstaying my visa when I got to Berlin and they checked my passport. So I had to pay a 110 euro bail to even get out of that. And in the end, partly because of that, I missed my flight to Glasgow. However, I wasn't the only one to miss my flight to Glasgow because Frankfurt Airport is freaking massive, and a lot of other people going to the UK also missed their flights as well, because we had to go down a bunch of stairs, go across a long corridor, and then go up a bunch of stairs, and then go across another long corridor, and then go through passport checks, and then you would get to the gates. So yeah, it was a very... Frankfurt Airport is massive, and so a lot of people missed their flights, and as did I. So fortunately, we got a free night of hotel near Frankfurt Airport, and I actually got Sheraton. So that was nice, and in a way, I guess you could consider my 110 euros to have paid for the night of airport hotel. But still, it wasn't fun to know that I had, violated visa rules. But at the same time, I feel like 110 euros is cheaper than getting some sort of flight to somewhere outside of the EU. So, yeah, I don't really know necessarily, but maybe I could have flown to like Switzerland and then kind of exited and re-entered from there. I'm not really sure, but yeah, anyways, I had to pay a bail, and that was not fun for my wallet. And then after that, it's getting really close to the end of my trip now, but this next regret also takes place in Germany, and it's not being able to meet Taya a second time in Berlin. Now, in case you didn't know, Taya recently had her first EP debut event in Berlin. I think it was on the 29th or something like that, which was a shame for me because I had to get back to Vilnius by the 29th because my flight back home was on the 30th. So I had to go back to Vilnius on the 29th, not only to get ready for my flight, but also to pick up some stuff that I had put in my dormitory before I left. My roommate was still staying for the next term, so basically my stuff was staying with him, and I had to go back and pick up that stuff to bring back home, basically. And because of that, I only stayed, or was only able to stay in Berlin for like 2 days, or really even 1 day, to be quite honest. But and it was even worse because I missed my first flight to Berlin from Glasgow. and I had to take an emergency flight from via Amsterdam, actually, which might have been where I lost my ICO bracelet, sadly. But yeah, I wanted to meet Taya again because the first time I had met her was in Vienna. We had a great time chatting, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that, but someone else in my group chat was, and they had a great time there, and they also took like pictures, photos in the photo booth, and that kind of stuff. And I really, really wished that that event was could have taken place like 1 or 2 days earlier, because in that case I would have been able to go and have the most amazing time ever. But sadly, I wasn't able to, and so yeah, that's just bad luck on that part. It's not really something I can really do. Like in hindsight, there's nothing I could really have done to really alleviate that. But it's still something that's something that I regret not being able to do. But sometimes you can't fix everything, right? And on the second point of Berlin, I just wanted to stay there longer, because while I did have a great time on my pretty much singular day, or well, I guess 1.5 days in Berlin, I think Berlin is just such a historically rich city that it would probably take months to fully explore Berlin as a city, because it has been through so many things. Even today, there's still the Great Divide between East Berlin and West Berlin, and it's just a very historically significant place, and I really wish I had more time in Berlin. And again, next time if I go to Europe, I really, really want to go back to Berlin and explore it more thoroughly, let's just say. And my final regret is not getting British Chinese food in Glasgow. Now, as you know, in the UK, in the UK and Ireland, actually, people like, quote unquote, getting a Chinese, which is a meal from basically these Chinese takeaway places. But I'm ethnic Chinese, and I feel like if I did get one, my ancestors would probably be angry at me. But I still really wanted to do it, and now that I'm back here having proper Chinese food, I'm kind of regretting not getting the trash, deep fried British Chinese food back when I stayed in Glasgow. But otherwise, I actually had a really good time in Glasgow. I visited several museums. I ate a lot of delicious food. I even tried ugali, which is a kind of West African food. And I had a great time in Glasgow, but there was one regret, was that I couldn't try having a Chinese, or as the Australians might say, a succulent Chinese meal. So that's really about it in terms of what's happened in the last 8 months or so. And in terms of what's next, you can see on the slide, it says near future, traveling through Europe, staying in Glasgow. I procrastinated so much making this video that both of those things have already happened, but I can talk about what will happen for me in 2025. But basically, it's not going to be that exciting. I'm going to just stay in East Asia. I'm going to finish my degree, and maybe I'll make some more videos. I'm not really sure. I'll make maybe more blog posts, although it might not be on my current blog. I'll just have to figure things out. And in the more distant future, I really do hope that I can move to and settle in Europe, because, you know, mentally, I really do feel like I belong there. Like, even though my stomach and my mouth clearly disagree, like literally every second I'm there, I lament the loss of proper Asian food. But in general, kind of my brain says that I really do belong there. So I think for now, I'm gonna finish my degree here at home, but more distantly, I am looking to move to Europe, perhaps somewhere within the EU, as opposed to the other places in Europe like Scotland. I do want to settle in Scotland, but I would probably wait for them to like kind of join the EU first. So yeah, that also brings us to our conclusion, is that Europe is very, very different to East Asia, needless to say, but in some ways surprisingly similar, like pig ears, apparently. And all of my friends are in Europe. I've met a lot of them while I was there. It was amazing times. Depending on where you go, you get some really, really good food as well, and also good things to see and do. And long term, I really do want to settle in Europe, probably somewhere in the EU. Ideally, a Scotland that is in the EU, an independent Scotland in the EU, but that's going to be a way longer term project. We'll just have to see how things pan out. And we'll just have to see if it really comes to pass. But again, ideally, I just want to move to Europe for my long term. I feel like spiritually, that is just where I belong. And yeah, that is about it for my reflection of my time in Vilnius and in Europe. So if you're someone who's now interested in going to Vilnius, definitely go and check it out. I think Lithuania in general is a very, very interesting country. It's really the convergence of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Soviet Union, and this is also the only place in the world where you can hear someone curse or swear in Polish and in Russian in rapid succession. So that's something that you can't find in any other country in the world, because people in Poland probably don't curse in Russian, and people in Russia or other ex-Soviet states probably don't curse in Polish. So that's another interesting thing about Lithuania. And obviously, Lithuania itself has a lot of history behind it as well, but it's this convergence of two more dominant places plus their own identity, which really makes Lithuania what it is today, and it's still massively growing. And let's hope that one day in the distant future they will have a goddamn metro, or at least a tram system. Please, 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 because the current public transport system is abysmal. So that is about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed listening to me rant about Vilnius and Europe for at least 2 hours at this point, probably. But if you just enjoy this video, like this video so I can know about it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my upcoming content, which will be some of the vlogs that I have taken throughout my travels throughout Europe. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and I'm recording this on my birthday, so I just turned 22, so everyone please write happy birthday Rigel in the comments. Thank you very much.